Could it be that God is not a person? Should we not rather see God as something non-personal, or even something which is above personality or personhood? This idea that God is something apersonal or non-personal has a very important insight going for it. Because if we conceive God like a human person, with the feelings and conflicting feelings and desires and conflicting desires and bodily temptations of a human person, we end up with gods like the Greek gods of ancient Greece, which are envious, no envy, which are struggling amongst each other, which have a physical appearance. If God is a person somewhat like a human person, just a little bit stronger, or certain characteristics better developed in human persons, that's certainly not the being of which no greater can be conceived. It is more like a superman, a superhuman. And that is not what God is supposed to be, philosophically speaking. So many people then say God is more like a principle, an abstract idea, or even an energy which they can feel in certain important moments in their lives. They feel an energy which they then interpret as a divine energy. There's a deep insight here that God, if you say God is a principle, that's the insight that God doesn't have a physical body. God is something which is outside of the physical world. And if you say God is energy, you feel that God is attracting you, for example, has an influence on you. But if God was simply a principle, a mathematical principle, or an energy, could God possibly be the greatest of all beings? Because if God was simply a principle, like a mathematical truth or a mathematical concept like a triangle, God wouldn't have a first-person perspective, would not be able to engage in second-personal relationships, I-thou relationships. God wouldn't have feelings, or at least some kind of consciousness. Might not have feelings in terms of, speaking of bodily sensations, but some kind of consciousness, so that God would be able to enter in a love relationship with humans. A principle, a mathematical principle, cannot do this. And even if God is just an energy doesn't have a first-person perspective. So while speaking about God as an idea or a principle is useful in removing God from too close a conception of divine personhood, too close to human bodily existence, it falls short of making God the greatest possible being. Because having a first-person perspective, being able to engage in I-thou relationships, in relationships of love, is something eminently good. And a mathematical principle which lacks this is missing out on this good, so could not be possibly the greatest being. So God must contain in himself something which is somewhat akin to human personhood, but infinitely larger, bigger. So we shouldn't go back to the old anthropomorphic Greek picture. God is just a very strong person. It has to be radically different, but it cannot be without I perspective, first person perspective, without being able to relate to other persons in an I-thou relationship, without being able to love. So all of this has to be in some way preserved in God. And in that respect, the idea that God is completely apersonal, I think, does not lead us to the idea of classical theism in which God is the perfect being.